We talk about the South African Confederation Project with Jonathan Wright from the Firearms Policy Campaign. And in this episode, Jonathan takes us through the political meaning and the shenanigans of that time. If you're anyway into history, and specifically about the firearms history in this country, then I trust that you will find this very interesting indeed. Enjoy. Good evening, Rian Kutsia, Fortis Proactive Defense Solutions. I'm back with Jonathan Wright in part 2 of a series we're calling Muskets to Magazines. And this episode 2, is about the South African Confederation Project. Jonathan, welcome and good evening.
Good evening, Rian. Thanks for having me back. Excited to talk
about
always.
This. Yes, I'm hyped. I think this is the history of what we are, where we are today is interesting and worthwhile knowing about in how it shaped things as we know it. So
this is where it starts. Like last week, we spoke about the colonial laws, which were quite dry, yes. And I did a lot of the talking. I admit that, but there isn't really much. There's nothing storytelling about it. But this is the
yes.
point in our history where you start to get narratives and things become interesting, because now you're not dealing with the law, you're dealing with people, and people are inherently more interesting.
Absolutely. And just for the viewers and for the listeners, Jonathan is in the final stages of completing his doctorate, and the subject on that is all to do with firearms and firearms rights in South Africa and the whole history thereof, which is where the idea for this series came from. So, Jonathan, to start off with, tell us about the Confederation Project, because it's not very well known. And how has this shaped very specifically Black firearm ownership historically?
Before I get into that, I want to say why I was laughing there when you mentioned my doctorate, my imminent stages, because it's true. But I don't think I'm going to make the 1st of November deadline, which means I don't get my doctorate in March. I get it in December next year.
In December.
So I write faster than my supervisor can read. But he does have a lot of other students, so. But yeah, so that's just some context there.
Okay.
So yeah, the Confederation Project, not many people know about it because not many people know about South Africa's history of firearm laws at all. I think in our very first chat when I introduced the FPC, I mentioned that, yeah, maybe some people, know about the 1937 Arms and Ammunition Act. A lot of people know about the 1969 one. Everyone obviously knows about the Firearms Control Act, but virtually nobody knows what came before the 1937 Act. And that's where everything starts to go towards from this point in time, the Confederation Project. So what is the Confederation Project? It was a desire, a dream of sorts, you could say, by imperial politicians in London in the 1870s who looked at Canada that had also just gone through its Confederation Project, and it had been very successful. And I don't know anything about the Canadian Confederation. I just know that it happened and it was successful because it still exists today. But in the context of the 1870s, they looked at that, they thought, this is great. And they looked at South Africa and they thought, well, why the hell are these 4 territories of the Cape, Natal, Orange Free State, and ZAR, Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, not just join them together? Like, it makes no sense that they're all separate. Problem with it was that the Orange Free State and ZAR were Boer states, Dutch, and the Cape and Natal were English colonies. So you've got 4 different jurisdictions. You can divide them into 2 and 2, but they're all different. Even though the Cape and Natal are English colonies, they have very different approaches to firearm regulation and native policy, how they treat the Black people and tribes in their territory. And of course, the Orange Free State barely had any black people in it at all. And the ZAR had quite a lot, but it was quite an interesting, I've mentioned in previous videos, an interesting political system of chaos and just, yeah, utter chaos. So the Confederation Project was basically a problem of, okay, now how do we bring these four countries together? And that is where that started. So they can create one South African Confederation. Um, how did it affect, how did it shape black farm ownership? As mentioned, each of these four territories had their own approach to native policy and firearm policy. Uh, and the planners for Confederation, or planner, I'll go with that, Sir Bartle Frere, who was sent to the Cape to do this, to bring about Confederation. Uh,
I
he,
take it he was sent from London to come and do this.
he was the his exact position or title was I think he was governor, but he was also, there was a specific term for it. High Commissioner, I think is the word.
Mhm.
He replaced Berkeley, uh, who had been sent to South Africa to achieve responsible government for the Cape. And he did. He got that in 1871. And he was of the liberal mind. And so he had no issue with firearms and that. And he wanted liberal native policy. At least that's what I believe on the native policy front. Frere, on the other hand, did not share those sentiments. And yeah, he was sent to South Africa to bring about Confederation. So it was his job to find out what the differences were, get rid of them, make everyone the same, and then, well, it would be easier to join them all together. And firearm policy, as mentioned, was a huge part of this. Um, I I want to go straight into it right now? I don't know. I know you have some questions prepared, but I don't want to talk too long on a topic. So I'll let you. I'll throw it back to you now. That's what the
Okay,
Confederation
thanks.
Project was, and that's how black people were implicated.
Implicated. Okay, so to continue with that topic, maybe you can expand on the legal barriers that black South Africans faced in owning firearms. Legal, social, political barriers.
Yeah, so as mentioned, all four of these territories were different. So I'm going to go by one, and we'll start with the Cape. A liberal humanitarian disposition, characterized by the three C's of colonization, which was commerce, civilization, and what was the third one? Christianity. And so the Christianity one they had down to a T. The Cape were, and South Africa broadly speaking, but especially the Cape, was full of missionaries. Wesleyan Christian missionaries were very prevalent, but there were also Catholics and Lutherans and all the other denominations. But the Wesleyans were quite prominent. I came across references to them more often than any of the other ones in
Okay.
my research. And they strongly advocated for farm ownership amongst the unwashed heathens of the interior. And I'm being tongue in cheek about this, but yeah, these are the black tribes who are factually pagans to the Christian religion, and they've come down here to convert them, yes, but they also have a much deeper appreciation for the value of the human being and their soul in the eyes of God than maybe a politician or a normal person does. And so they fundamentally saw black people as so all children of God and therefore entitled to the God-given rights, which included owning a firearm. Because with a
Mhm.
firearm, you can look after yourself, you can look after your family, you can look after your tribe. And my camera is a bit high, but I'm busy counting with my fingers as I go here. You can hunt. You're a much more effective hunter. You can provide for your family, your tribe, yourself now. Um, so those were the Christian missionaries. They were often at odds with the politicians in government throughout the country. But they wanted black people to have guns, and they wanted them to have as many as possible. Okay, maybe not as many as possible, but they wanted to have guns.
Yeah, they needed them to have guns.
Yeah.
Probably, well, I mean, there were many, so it would have been many guns. So I
Well,
suppose
I
in a
don't think
way
they
you're
would have
right.
applied a limit to it.
Yes.
Uh, there were also the traders, the merchants. Now they have a commercial interest because, argument's sake, there are like for every 10 Europeans, there's 100 black people. There's a market, and it's helpful if we can trade with them because they will give us more. The 100 black people will give us more in income and revenue than the 10 white Europeans who might not even be that wealthy. They might be just as poor and impoverished as these people who don't even have a formal concept of money, even if they do
Yes.
have a concept of wealth in the form of cattle. And they had a commercial interest in this respect, and they obviously these traders, this is the early colonial era, money doesn't mean that much. If I give you a gun and you give me 2 cows, I still win because at least I've got meat now for the next couple of weeks. I'm not saying that was the exchange rate for cows and guns. I'm just saying that as an arbitrary example. And then there were the liberal politicians who I think are quite similar in mind to the missionaries, where they believe traditional liberal principles that limited small government, maximum freedom for the individual. And firearm ownership is one of these things because, again, look after yourself, look after your family, your community, go and hunt and get food or whatever. And this liberal humanitarian disposition was the dominant political force in the Cape. And yeah, that was quite a lengthy description of what it was, but I think it's important to break it down a bit further than just there was a liberal disposition. In Natal, I don't actually really know what there was in Natal. I didn't get much of a good impression of the culture of the political culture there. In fact, it smacked a lot like modern Europe in a sense. So, despite all of the romantic notions of the last outpost, my father used to have that bumper sticker on his car because he's from Natal. Uh, and but it was always quite nanny statist. It was very controlling, and in respect of um, firearms, it from the start, from the beginning, it did not like the idea of black people with guns, and so they were always really strict on registration and what. Why is somebody calling me? Go away. Might be Capitec, but it's 7 o'clock at night. Anyway, yeah, so they were very nanny. They were obsessed with controlling and registering every single firearm they could find from the start. Like from the day they made a law in 1847, that was it. Um, Chiefs got privileges. They could have, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they were entitled to a certain weight in pounds of gunpowder, uh, which was like half of what a white European colonist could have. So yeah, they
If
could
if
have
they
it.
if they if they turned religious.
I don't actually know. I don't think so because
Okay.
the the s- the missionaries were definitely very active there, and when we get to the Langalibalele affair, which is another video all by itself, um, then Bishop Colenso comes up, and he had big concerns about how that affair could affect missionary work. So the missionaries were there in Natal. I don't know how much they were of that Cape liberal tradition. I think they
Okay.
were, but they were not very. It was not a dominant political attitude in Natal. Their system of their native policy as well was kind of all vested in one man, which was this benevolent despotism of Sir Theophilus Shepstone, and he was the governor, the lieutenant governor for the colony, the president, basically the premier, but he was also the supreme chief. and all of the little tribes would answer to him. And he would he could speak fluent isiZulu, and he was very, very in tune and in touch with traditional culture. So he understood how their religious practices worked for the more cultural ancestral worship and traditional African religious institutions.
Okay.
But obviously, this is the colonial era, and Christian conversion is part of it. But that was left to the missionaries. It's not like the government really had too much to do here.
Okay.
And so Shepstone kind of ruled over the black people of Natal by himself, by sheer force of character and personality. He wasn't really vested with formal law. He was an appeals judge for any tribal disputes and those sorts of things because he understood the culture.
Yes.
But yeah, so one thing I didn't mention about the Cape, jumping back a little bit, was that yes, okay, so they didn't mind because of the liberal humanitarian disposition. There was almost no concern about black people having firearms. They could get them if they wanted to. All they needed was to just pay the fee for the permit, and they could have a musket or whatever it was they wanted. There weren't really any formal restrictions beyond safety concerns, such as how much gunpowder you could keep in a house or a hut or something like that, because it's flammable. And yeah, that's not a good thing to have when there's a fire. Anyway, so we've done Cape and we've done the Natal territories. Orange Free State didn't really have much of anything from what I could find. The sources said there weren't many black people in the Orange Free State to begin with, so they didn't really need much of a native policy. Yes, they had the Sotho on their eastern borders, but they had I think 1 or 2 wars with them, and that was the end of that problem. As for firearms, I did have an 1899 law that said that they can get them. They just need to get a permit and have like character references from European or Boer farmers, but 1 or 2, I don't remember the exact details. But that was their approach. They didn't have a native policy. They didn't really have much of a firearm policy either. They didn't like the idea as a general principle of armed black people. We can say that. It's not like it's a Boer version of the Cape, although it is much closer to the Cape than it is to the ZAR. The ZAR didn't have much of anything. They tried to set up a native policy with form of reserves, which is what Natal had. This black tribe will sit here and they can stay there. In Natal, they had reasonable security of tenure. They wouldn't just get kicked off arbitrarily. But in the ZAR, they tried to institute a system of reserves, but they didn't really make any progress. And it really just turned into, okay, we have these, okay, you, the Bapedi, you can go sit there on that land, but don't be surprised if in 5 minutes we come and kick you off it because we want to give that land to somebody else. And it was so out of control and chaotic that the ZAR it didn't have any control over its own citizens. They did whatever they wanted, largely. Even the black tribes, there was the firearm policy. They didn't like the idea of black people with guns, but it was a statement of intent in the laws. There wasn't really anyone to enforce it, so they kind of just left them alone. They basically ruled in autonomy until a Boer farmer decided, hey, I want that land. And it was so bad that they even ended up stealing land from missionaries and the Zulu, who are not even part. The Zulu kingdom is not even part of the ZAR, but they were encroaching on those lands. Sir David Livingstone, like the great Christian missionary and explorer, even he complained quite strongly against the ZAR government, like, you need to do something. They couldn't do anything. So yeah, those were the gist of the policies, native and firearm for the four territories. I think I've answered your question there.
I think so, yes. So talking about this firearm regulation policy, how did it impact on things like safety and autonomy, maybe rights, specifically for the black community?
So as mentioned, in the case of the Orange Free State, there isn't really much of an answer to this question because there isn't much to answer to.
Mhm.
In the case of the ZAR, we have the Bapedi people, and I'm trying to think how to weave them into this answer because in the terms of like security, like they had firearms and things like that, but there's not really, I don't know too much about them besides in the 1860s when the ZAR was in absolute turmoil and the Bapedi were sick and tired of having their land. They kept being told, you can settle here, and they got kicked off, and then you can settle here now, and then they got kicked off that. And so they rose up in rebellion and they went and sat in the Lulu Mountains. I don't know which mountains exactly those are. Uh, I've seen that some mountains have like 3 names attached to them. And yeah, they went and sat there, and the ZAR couldn't get them out because they were so disorganized.
Did you
So
say, sorry, Jonathan, you said the Lulu Mountains?
the Lulu Mountains, yeah.
Maybe somebody in the comments can give us more insight into that.
Yeah, I did try find out where they were, and I did. I've just forgotten. There's so many details, and it's quite a small one in the big scheme of things. But yeah, they rose up in rebellion, and they used their firearms. I don't think they were really necessary to to be well armed. The ZAR wasn't, like I said, it wasn't in a very good state or at all, let alone strong. So they rose up and they did that. So make of that what you will. Maybe you can see a parallel there in terms of safety and there's certainly a rebellion angle to it. Like, look, we're sick and tired of being stepped on. We're going to use our guns and we're
Mm.
going to go sit in the mountains. Good luck coming to get us. In Natal, we got the Langalibelele affair, but that's not really related to the Confederation topic because that happened 2 years before Confederation happened. Um, But the gist obviously being that, look, if the black people don't have guns, well, then we can do whatever we want with them because what are they going to do? Throw some spears at us? Well, not now. They've got guns, so we won't do that.
That sounds very much like an argument thrown about today, except now it's by all gun owners.
It is. I mean, there's so many
Mm.
parallels with the colonial era and with our past. Like, like people say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Yeah, there's a lot of rhyming going on here. Um, and in the case of the Cape, well, we get the Basutu. Well, we've got the Causa on the eastern frontier. They are not inside the Cape. They're beyond the frontier. Now, this frontier is constantly moving as the Cape consolidates. It needs more land to build cities and settlements and farmland. So, yeah, the Causa they were not in the Cape Colony. They were beyond the frontier, and the Cape's frontiers were constantly moving as the colony consolidated and more people moved there, and they needed more land. And it's an expanding civilization for all intents and purposes. It needs territory and resources to support it. And the Causa in the Transkei region, okay, well now we're kind of really talking about around Grahamstown, Etenage, Queenstown, that area. The Zierveld. Well, I don't know why they called that because it was really fertile and good land. Um, but anyway, so they were that's where the Causa were. And they constantly agitated against the Cape government. They constantly defied it and rebelled at every opportunity they could get. And you can say you can sympathize with it. Like from their perspective, there are these strange white foreign invaders and they're on our land now. And there were lots of accusations by the colonists of, well, they're stealing our cattle, but the Causa would say the same thing about them. Well, they're stealing our cattle. And it's like this tit for tat. They stole some cattle, so we steal some theirs, and like circle of violence just goes. And by the 1870s, there have been several huge frontier wars already. There was one in 1820 where the Causa nearly successfully besieged Grahamstown. There was another big one in 1835, 1846, 1852, I think. Nothing really happened in the 1860s. And 1875 coincides now with the Confederation Project, uh, which was the last big one, the last actual war that I know of, the Cape Frontier. There are a number of different names for these wars, but the politically correct and accepted one, I think it's quite descriptive, is the Cape Frontier War. So the Cape, there's this tension between the Causa and the Cape government in this respect, and I have my criticisms of the Causa. I mean, I sympathize with them, but I'm also a realist. The Zulu and the Sotho are good examples of people, tribes who looked at the European colonists and thought, yeah, these people aren't going anywhere. We may as well get comfortable with them and see what we can do to benefit. The Causa were not like that. They were from the beginning. They were just like, no. But it's largely because of how the tribal hierarchies were um, distributed. They were not, even though they were all Causa, they've got these different groups. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but you've got the Galekas and the Katalekas, and you've got these other ones, and there's the Tembu, and there's a lot. They're not united. The Zulu might have their clans, but they were united. The Sotho might have had their clans, but they were united.
Okay.
The Xhosa were not like that. And so, and the chiefs often, I describe them as petulant. They would start a war, they would get utterly obliterated. In the beginning, they'd have good success, but then the Cape would organize its forces and soldiers, and then that would be the end of that. But rather than going back to wherever they lived with their tails between their legs to regroup and rethink and okay, like what does it actually mean? They did that, but only for as long as they could needed until they could regain some strength to try again. They wouldn't even gain full strength. They just gained some strength and they'd do it again. And then of course they'd lose. And so this caused a lot of resentment among the colonists on the eastern frontier. And for the cause of these wars were really traumatic and brutal. And so for the cause, it was an existential dread question that they felt they had to deal with. It was like either we're going to just push these colonists back into the sea, or we've got nothing. There's nothing to see here. In the case of the Sotho, the Mfengu, there were a couple of other groups as well, loyal to the Cape government, and for them, firearms were a very strong cultural item. It embodied a sense of citizenship because to them they were like, the Cape government trusts us. This is a good thing. And we can go and hunt, even though there's nothing left to hunt because we've killed everything together with the white European colonists. They've also shot everything. There's no, the days of these thousands of springbok running through the Orange Free State, for example, are over. They're long gone. They've been hunted to
Okay.
borderline extinction by now, most game. But for the Sotho, protection is a big thing. Self-defense is a big thing. They still remember their wars with the Orange Free State. They want to be ready if the Orange Free State decides they want the mountains of the Drakensberg as well. And I think I've given a good sense of what it meant to the people in terms of like self-defense and those sorts of things. And I don't want to ramble too long because I have done a bit of rambling already. But if I've answered your question,
The problem
please
is
don't feel free to interrupt me as well and bring me back if you feel
no,
I'm
that's
running
sure.
away.
The thing with history is there's so many aspects and facets to it, and so many things that happen. I mean, we're trying to stick to the subject of insofar as history has to do with firearms. And so many things happen. And I think it's quite easy to ramble because it's,
There's a
well, if you
lot.
feel about history the way I do, it's interesting, you know. And when a topic is interesting for you, then it's quite easy to just ramble on about it because, you're enjoying it. So I'm going to ask you then, as a result of this conversation, what solutions do you recommend? You wrote an article about it today on your website. What solutions do you recommend for more equity and more just firearm policies going forward?
Well, for one, you need to be sensitive about who is going to be subject to these laws. Who are they being written for? And the government would tell you, oh, we're writing them for the criminals. But the ANC's, I don't know his full name, but in the Hansard, he is Mr. George. Back in 2000 during the debates for the Firearms Control Act, he was quoted by someone else in Parliament as saying during a committee meeting, we have to make laws for the law-abiding citizen because we can't make laws for criminals because they are, by definition, criminals. So the government, at least at that point, I don't think they appreciated those words, but it like kind of shows just, I mean, throughout my doctorate, I talk about the sense of this hubris, this naive, even insane belief in that the law can do literally anything we want it to do as long as we just believe. And that's like all you need apparently to, but if that was true, I think every country in the world would be a mecca of prosperity, but it's not. And so they don't really understand their target audience. And the result is that the law doesn't make sense. It's very arbitrary and it's very expensive to comply with. And now if you are middle class and above, then this is fine for most people, unless you have strong political opinions like or sentiment about firearm ownership, like we presumably do. Then you'll be like no, this is complete BS. I don't like being treated like this because the government assumes by default that you are a criminal. Uh, that's why the laws are here, to make sure that the criminals don't get it, but they're written in such a way as to you have to do motivations and you can only have so many and then your ammunition limits and then you got to renew and all these other things because one day you might become a criminal overnight sort of thing. And this was how the Confederation Project looked at black people specifically. Freire had his own notions about civilization, and in his mind black or white, it didn't matter. In a civilized country, you do not carry firearms. And if you do, it means that the society is uncivilized. And so we have to get rid of the firearms. We have to stop this practice because this is not what a civilized country looks like. And so
I don't like Freer. Judged on that.
he's not an easy person to like. But yeah, there books have been written about him. And there was also this very paternalistic perspective on what firearms did to the black mind. People like Frere and Sprigg, who was the Cape Premier after Maltino got kicked out, was that firearms made black people do silly things that they later regretted. They never intended to do these things. They didn't intend to rebel. But because they had a
Yes.
firearm, they thought that now they could. I think some of the words, someone I read in the Hansard was the thought of every black man is to get a gun as fast as he can, because with it he can contend with the white man. Those were the exact words. Okay, not exact. There were some differences. But I'm not going to say here. But that's the
It's
sentiment.
unreal to sit in 2025 and just hear the thinking of that time. It's kind of boggles the mind, really.
And it's very similar to today. Like it's not as blunt as it was like
Mm,
as back then. But things are the same. Like most people that are not most people that are opposed to farm ownership, there are not too many in my experience. Even if they don't carry themselves, they don't mind if someone else does, as long as they're not a criminal. But
mm.
for people like the anti-gun brigade, as I like to call them, to carry a firearm is like the hallmark of barbarism, like barbarity. Like, no, this is a civilized country. You
Yeah.
shouldn't need to do that. It's like, well, I'm sorry, I live in reality here, and in reality, there are bad people that want to do bad things to me. So when they do that, I am going to hopefully not, but I am ready to shoot them if they do, sort of thing.
Jonathan, I battle with that mindset or that view of things so much that I really am yet to be, I'm yet to wrap my mind around it, because to me, you know, I mean, the world has never been this very peaceful place in general.
Yeah.
I think
The
we've
world is
had
better today than it was 100 years ago. There's no
it
doubt.
exactly, you know, but violence has always been part of it, and it sort of comes and goes in phases. I think Europe specifically has gone through a phase after the Second World War where specifically the Western parts of Europe have had it very good
They've
in the
been,
sense that
yeah,
you know,
they're
things were,
comfortable.
yeah, it's comfortable. But if you look at a country like South Africa, like the US, I mean, violent crime is it's everywhere. We see and hear and read about it all the time. So for me, and you're sitting in a situation where um, we have to pay security companies large amounts of money to try and safeguard us. But at the end of the day, you know, we have to do it ourselves because they're all reactionary. We've spoken about this. Um, so for
Okay.
me, if anybody, I don't mind if you don't like guns. That to me, I mean, you're free to not like guns. That's no problem at all. I don't have a hassle with that. But in a situation like the one we find ourselves in, with all the violence, it's so prevalent. Um, if anybody says to me that we shouldn't have to have guns, um, I immediately start wondering about whether you've had your pulse, because do
Or their
you not,
intentions.
all their intentions? And I think that is probably more where your thought pattern needs to go than because you can't live in this country and not
Mm.
know the
I don't think you,
situation.
you can't live in this world. I mean, you mentioned Europe and
Mm,
they've gone soft and they've completely bought into this very colonial, Freer-like notion that firearms are not what you carry in a civilized society. They sneer at the United States. Um, but yet when there's a horrific terrorist attack, the Europeans are never able to respond because nobody can do
mm.
anything. In the case of the UK, they like, our police don't even carry guns. Only certain ones do. It's like, yeah, that does not make me feel any safer because the bad
No,
guys do have guns. What's your
they
anti-stab vest going
always
to
do.
do?
The bad guys always have guns, because why would they settle for anything less if they can get guns? Um, they can get guns a lot faster than you and I can get them, as you know, following the legal process.
And the UK is slightly insulated, like Australia. They're an island nation. It's a bit more
Mm,
difficult for criminals to get guns. They have to go through extra hurdles. But in the case of Germany,
mm,
well, I'm sure there's someone in Serbia that can hook you up with an AK-47. And I'm sure
mm.
every Bosnian babushka has an AK under the bed because they remember what happened in 1995.
Yes.
Um, and so we have this anti this notion that carrying firearms is anti-civilization. It's very prevalent in Europe. And there are people in South Africa that think like this, specifically the anti-gun brigade. This is how Frere thought. This is how most of these people thought when they, although as mentioned in Frere's case and Sprigg and people like him, the anti-liberals, as they were called. Firearms made black people do stupid things that and cause wars and which was complete rubbish because the Mfengu
Mm,
and the Sutu, like the Sutu were armed to the teeth. They never did anything wrong. In fact, they
mm,
were so loyal to the colonial order that I came across a story in which there was a group of Sutu men were fighting and there were firearms involved. And I don't think anybody died. But fighting is illegal. You can't do that. And
mm,
so they were all summoned by the magistrate in Basutoland, modern day Lesotho, who read out a charge of you've all been charged with unlawful fighting. How do you plead? And every single one of them cried out in unison, guilty. We have broken the colonial order rules. And so the magistrate said, okay, I pronounce you guilty. Your penalty is £3 fine, which was a lot of money back then, and you will be deprived of your firearms for 3 months. And they all agreed, they all paid their fine, and they all put their muskets and whatever on the floor of the courtroom without a word, and they left. And
That was a serious fine back then.
yeah, it was, but the reaction to it is the more startling thing. It's like, wow, okay, they could have shot the magistrate, they didn't.
Exactly. Exactly.
And in the case of the Mfengu and the Sotho as well, they were when the Queen of England, the Sotho were answerable to the Queen in London, basically, and she was their great white queen. And when she said, "We need your help because the Xhosa are causing trouble again," the Sotho were there to help. When the Anglo-Zulu War happened, um, there were Sotho men waiting to receive the stragglers that were fleeing from the Zulu before the British got their act together. And the Mfengu as well, very grateful to be a part of the colonial order. They used to be subservient to the Xhosa. So the Mfengu are not a real tribe. They're kind of just a group of refugees from different tribes fleeing the Zululand conflicts of the 1810s and 1820s. And they had no social institutions left, so they just attached themselves to whatever they could. And at first it was the Xhosa, but the Xhosa looked down on them because they were now there were more mouths to feed, and the Xhosa are not exactly an industrial or agricultural powerhouse. So the Mfengu were resented. When the colonial borders got nearer, and the British were like, "Yo, come live here. You can be part of the colonial economy, you can earn money, you can buy clothes and pots and pans and plows, and you'll always have food as long as you have money to buy it." For them, they're like, this is great. So they defected from the Xhosa, and that was one of the reasons that kind of resulted in these Cape Frontier Wars. Again, another topic, much like the Langali Balele. That'll be another video. The point is that firearms and in general, with these attitudes, anti-civilization, don't carry them in public. But if black people have it, that's even worse because they do stupid things when they have guns. So we need to take it away from them. And they started in 1877 with the Gunpowder Act, which was really there to just try and reduce the supply of gunpowder to the Xhosa beyond the frontier. Don't really think it achieved much. But the effect was that it limited everything to everyone, loyal black and white colonists. They all had to struggle now to get gunpowder more than they did before because the government had decided we don't trust you anymore. You have to fill in these extra forms now, and you have to do this and you have to do that, and then you can get your gunpowder, and you can only have so much of it, and all of that sort of thing. And then in 1878, the hammer came down with the Peace Preservation Act, where it's a completely neutral bill. There's no mention of skin color or group affiliation anywhere in that law, but everybody with a brain knew what it meant. And by brain, I mean the Wesleyan missionaries and the liberal humanitarians and the merchant traders. They knew that this law was going to be applied to black people, and it was. At first, it was used to disarm the Xhosa because the last Cape Frontier War happened in 1875. This law was 3 years later. So they've already been banished and they've already been defeated. But now, just for the cherry on top, we're going to take away their guns. But that's not really too controversial. Shouldn't be. It's a war. It's a very brutal war. It's a reasonable desire of any victorious power, especially when you're dealing with an enemy that just keeps on rebelling. Not to defend the colonial order in that sense. I'm just saying from the perspective of the government of the time, it's a logical thing to do. But then they said, you know what? No, that's not good enough. All of you, Mfengu, yeah, give up your guns. And they didn't like that, but they were manipulated through these notions of loyalty. The government said, well, if you are loyal, aren't you, to the colonial government? And they said, yes. I said, well, if you're loyal, then you'll give up your guns because it's for your safety. Like, I kid you not, these were the arguments for your own good. Where have you heard that one before?
For the greater good, yes.
Yeah, for the greater good. And so the Mfengu they didn't want to be seen as disloyal. They were loyal, so they gave up their guns. Unfortunately, that same strategy did not work for the Sotho, but we will discuss them separately in a separate video because, again, that's quite an exciting one, and I really look forward to dealing with
Well,
them.
I think we've established that the whole notion of that thinking was complete and utter nonsense.
And in line with as with the way Donald Trump does interviews, I know we've gone on a bit of a windy, loopy path here, but it's important to have this in mind. Like if the government trusts you, then you are a citizen. If it does not trust you, can you call yourself a citizen? The Sotho and the Mfengu could call themselves citizens, even though they were black and even though they didn't have the same voting rights as white people. But even white people didn't have the same voting rights as other white people because you needed to own property it was qualified franchise.
Okay.
But this is the Cape. I don't know how it was elsewhere in the other countries. But as far as firearms are concerned, well, you felt trusted. You can have a gun. And that it was a symbol of modernity, of citizenship, of a modern man had a gun. And the Sotho liked their guns. They weren't obsessed with them, but they really liked them. And so they had them all. And bring it back to the question you asked in the beginning, like what are more equitable laws? So, well, for one, maybe treat your people like citizens. Don't be so arbitrary about it. In the case of the Firearms Control Act, lots of poor people are locked out, or even though they can access it, it's very expensive and very difficult, not just in terms of money. Like if you've got a bricklayer who works on a construction site earning 100 Rand a day, and now he has to he's somehow, I don't know, maybe he found money under a bridge or something. Now he can afford the gun, he can afford the competency, and the proficiency training, he can afford all of that. But now he has to also take off an entire day from work. He can't earn money because he has to go and write these tests. I don't want to say silly tests. Like I do understand proficiency, the arguments for it, and I do like the idea of a more competent, responsible farm owner who is not going to accidentally shoot himself or someone else for that matter. But it takes a lot of time. This person can't earn money. That money might be the money they need to eat for that night, but they can't. They have to go sit and write the tests and shoot the test. And then they have to go apply for the competency. And that could and they take off the morning to go and apply. And the DFO is not there. Then they have to go home. But even if the DFO is there, then they still have to take off the morning to do it. And then they've got to come back to apply for the license later. And. It's not just money, it's time. And so poor people, most of whom are black in the South African context, are absolutely most affected by laws like the Firearms Control Act. And so what is a more equitable law? Well, it's one that's not arbitrary, one that doesn't have impossible ideas behind it. I criticize this control rationale, which is like, we will disarm the criminals. It's like, what rock have you been sleeping under for the past 30 years? Like, clearly that's not happened. Well, it wasn't. Yeah, well, maybe we just have to do it better. It's like it didn't work for the 40 years before that. The Arms Ammunition Act of 1969 didn't achieve it, and it replaced the 1937 Act, which had the same goals because it didn't achieve it. What are you trying to achieve? And this is why I get so upset when people are like, "Oh, the Firearms Control Act is good law; it's just badly implemented." Like, no, it's terrible law, terribly implemented because that's the only way to do it. It's just arbitrary top to bottom, and it's not even just bad law, arbitrary. It's impossible law. It has this idea of perfect control of firearms. At no point in the history of the universe has that ever happened. But we're going to do it this time.
Therein lies the answer in that word control.
And that was what the Confederation Project was about. Like, we can't unite these countries if they have different native policies and they have different firearm policies. They have to all be the same, whatever that is. Preferably restricted firearm policies and preferably no rights and whatever for the black people. Then we can form a union because we can control them. And by 1910, we do get a union, very different. Like the Confederation Project failed. That didn't happen, not in the 1870s. But that uniform native policy and that uniform firearm policy had come into closer alignment. And by 1910, it was almost perfected. In 1913, you start getting laws like the Land Act and things like that. And by the 1920s, Basutoland was supposed to be incorporated into South Africa, as was Swaziland. I think even Bechuanaland or Botswana was supposed to. But London, who ruled these countries directly, was looking at what was going on in South Africa politically in the 1920s and thought, yeah, we don't like where this is going. You know what? We're just going to park that idea for now and we'll see what happens. And well, sure enough, they never got integrated into South Africa because London was like, no, we can't do this. Like, this is terrible.
We've had enough.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well,
That's
Jonathan,
a solution and recommendation for better
that
law.
works. No, that works. Certainly for me. I'm sure there are people who will differ from that. Feel free to comment on it and let's hear what you have to say. That's Jonathan's solution. So, Jonathan, I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much once again for sharing all this knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me, because like now we're starting to get, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the more social, the more interesting sort of things, people and like how it's affected them. And there's a whole soap opera and drama coming along with what's still ahead just in the colonial era, but we'll get there. But this is, I hope this video makes people, and this topic makes people think a bit more critically, with a bit more awareness about, you know what, didn't think of that before. This is interesting, and they start seeing things. If somebody watches this video and has a 10-second process of, do I agree with that? No, I will have succeeded. So they don't have to agree with me. I just want people to think about these things, be aware of them.
So part 3 coming soon. For the viewers and the listeners, again, this episode will be available on Spotify on the podcast there called Quick Shots. And if you follow us on YouTube, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel, and as always, smash that bell icon so that you can get notifications of all the latest videos. If you are interested in getting in contact with Jonathan, the Facebook details will be displayed on screen. If you are interested in any of the training courses that the loan operator offers, there will be a link in the description below. Click on that, check it out. We hope to see you on a shooting range one of these days. That's it from me. Jonathan, you must enjoy your evening.
You as well, Rian. Thank you again.